really excited for this workshop. So welcome everyone. Nation of Makers kind of made this partnership happen. We were put into contact with Jen Fox, who's on the call from Microsoft, and we wanted to do some type of workshop for librarians who, well, pretty much every librarian has to deal with data, right? So, and Excel is a really great tool to do that. And I think this is something that we can all benefit from, but you know, librarians wear so many hats that sometimes we don't have a ton of time to learn all of these tools. So I am so excited that we have this opportunity from Johnnie from Excel. So on that note, oh, also you can ask questions in the chat and we'll try to keep a track of those, and we can also address those at the end. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Johnnie. Thanks so much for being here, Johnnie.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And just confirm folks can hear me all right. Can I get a thumbs up? Cool. All right, we'll get rolling. Thank you again for the opportunity. I shared this event on my LinkedIn and my Twitter, genuinely saying one of my favorite things to do is to talk to people about how Excel can make their life easier. A little bit about me. So I studied accounting and finance in school, and I actually came to Microsoft as a financial analyst and spent 10 years doing that, lots of different work, but basically I lived and breathed Excel during that time. It was kind of, I would be surprised if I was ever going to click the Excel icon and it wasn't immediately opening up like it had been open the entire time. I just always had Excel workbooks open, working in and out of them. And so I got pretty familiar with it and loved to work with my colleagues on like figuring out new ways to do things. And that slowly winded my way through various finance jobs, actually over into the Excel product development team, which is where I've been for the last 5 years. So it's a long-winded way of saying I've got a lot of experience in Excel, but I think you're all familiar with like, it's a big tool. There are lots of things to do. So I would by no means say I know everything there is in Excel. I am constantly learning things, and it's just sort of an ongoing journey that I love being a part of. Setting the pace for today, what you can expect is there is a lot of content here, and I'm not just going to be sitting in this PowerPoint the entire time. We will actually be getting into Excel, but there is going to be a lot, and I don't honestly expect you're going to try and absorb all these things. The idea here is to walk away with some snippets of things that you could use or maybe go investigate further. So ask questions, feel free to interrupt me. Sarah's going to help me out on the chat here, but if I miss a question, someone will interrupt me. And I will also say with that, I'm going to try and keep us on time. So I reserve the right to acknowledge your question, but not answer it in the sake of keeping things moving and making sure we hit lots of different topics. But we'll try my best to cover everything we're talking about. And as I mentioned, I wouldn't recommend trying to follow along in Excel because that'll just kind of slow you down in terms of keeping up with what we're looking at. Just look for the takeaways, things to dig in deeper. And then this presentation also has like lots of resource links on training videos or help articles on the topics I'm going over. So we'll make sure you have this as well. And so if you ever need to like go back and like, what was that thing he was thinking about or talking about? This presentation will help kind of point you in the right direction. And then the last thing I'll say, it kind of goes with anything in Excel. I'm going to demonstrate a way to do things. It is not the way to do things. Like there's so many different routes to take. Again, these are just tools on ways to attack different problems. It's not to say that if you approach it in a different way, you're doing it the wrong way. Just hopefully there's something in here that can help you do things faster and quicker. With that, let's jump into first topic. So I'll throw out a scenario situation of I've got a tool that helps me manage resources. Let's say it's like equipment scheduling at a LibCal. And I need to go analyze and report that stuff. And so I need to take my data, get it into Excel. It's really easy to, usually from these tools, export into a .xls or a CSV file. But usually there's extra work you have to do just to get the data ready for you to actually do any analysis. Sometimes you've got to like get rid of extraneous data that's not useful to you, or there's other sort of scrubbing that you have to do to kind of fine tune a funky data export. And a lot of times you might have to do this frequently, like it's monthly reporting. And so every month I'm going through this same kind of annoying process to get my data ready to then do what I actually consider the interesting work. If that resonates for you, one approach here that could be really, really useful is something called get and transform. It's also known as Power Query. And I throw out that Power Query phrase because that's the one you want to use if you're searching on the internet. But what get and transform is basically a set of features for making it fast and easy to gather and shape data. And what I mean by gather and shape is it's going out and connecting to a data source and pulling it in. And then shaping is doing sort of that scrubbing stuff we talk about. Maybe it's getting rid of extra data, maybe it's adjusting or tweaking the data. But the important thing is fast and easy, and makes it really easy to be repeatable. And if you've ever heard of Power BI, which is another tool from Microsoft, it uses this Power Query technology as well. So if you learn how to use it in Excel, you're halfway to using this other Power BI tool for another form of reporting and analysis. So I'm going to actually show you what I'm talking about. And let me grab this. So I've got, let's say, a data export. Let's say this is sort of equipment scheduling, right? And so it's a CSV that's been reported out of some other system that I have. And now I'm going to try and get it into Excel to do some fine tuning to it. So it's got a date, it's got checkout and check-in times for the equipment, how long it was used for, and maybe there's like an equipment ID and a student ID for it. In this state, it's not quite ready for me to analyze. I need to go and do what I'd call sort of scrubbing on this data. And a lot of times what people do is, okay, I've got this export and I'll just start working in this file, or I'll copy and paste it into the file I'm going to focus on and start doing whatever I need to do. I'm going to show you the Power Query route to doing this and emphasize some of the important things that it brings to the table. So here's my sort of work file, kind of a blank thing. Under the data ribbon, we have this whole get and transform section. And this is about how do I go out to another source and grab data that I need for doing my analysis. And you see it's got lots of options on where to look. And if I click on this button, I'll see even way more options. So you can pull from other Excel workbooks, CSVs like we're going to do. But there's grabbing things from PDFs. You can actually go out and grab stuff off the internet. A really, really handy one that I've used quite a few times is Wikipedia is great at posting tables of like, oh, state populations or just these generic demographic information. And it's very, very easy to go out and just pull directly off of the web one of these tables and have it automatically imported into your workbook. So I'm going to step through the path of going and grabbing that data that we just looked at from our CSV. So I'm going to say grab from a CSV. And let me see, I put it, I'll cheat my way here and find where I have stuck it in my computer. And by the way, I'm grabbing a file off of my computer, but this connects to SharePoints. This can connect to online databases. Wherever your resource is, there might be a direct path, even if this exporting doesn't exist. So here's my data export. I'm going to click this import button, and it's going to pop up this sort of new view. It's connecting into the file, showing me what's there. And so it does a quick pull of here's what's in your file, giving you a little preview. I could just click load to drop it into my Excel workbook, but I'm going to hit this transform data button because it gives you more power, more things you can do before you even get it into your Excel workbook. So it's popped up this new window, which I know is a little bit intimidating, but trust me, if you need to ever do this work, this tool is going to become your friend. So what it's showing sort of in the main page here is the data that we've pulled. But if you actually look over to the right, this query settings thing, it's applying steps, sort of like what is the process of going and grabbing data and getting it ready for you to use. And it's already done 3 steps for me. So first, it went to the CSV file and grabbed our data. This is what it looked like when we were looking at it. Then it said, hey, this first row of data actually looks like it's a bunch of column headers. So it made those column headers. So now you have some more useful reference point for looking at your data. And then it's a CSV, so everything is text. But it said, Power Query automatically said, hey, some of this looks like it's not just text data. And it started to adjust things. It made things dates and times. It saw our duration number, how long things were checked out, and turned it into an actual number instead of text. So it's already in sort of a better spot for working with. Now I'm going to do my own additional steps here to change this file. So for me, our data export had a checkout time, but then it also had like a standardized UTC checkout time. I don't need that. Just one time is good enough for me. So I'm just going to click on it, and I can go hit remove column, and it's going to pull it out of the data source. And you see it added another step, remove columns. I don't need the checkout time doubled up either. So I'm going to remove that column. Okay, now I've got a little bit more tight and concise set of data for me to use. Another goofy thing, let's just say in my scenario, is these equipment IDs get exported, but actually this whole entire front part, MXPQQ, that's a weird system thing. That's not actually how we track our data. The part that I actually care about for my equipment IDs starts at this SE2122. So if I was doing my normal data scrubbing, I would say, okay, I've got to go through and change every single one of these columns, every single one of the values in this column to make it useful for me. But Power Query can help do this faster and quicker. I am going to say up here in the add column button, we get this create a column from examples button. And so what I'm just going to say is I want a whole new column for my equipment ID that is just this last part in the existing equipment ID button. And I'm just going to type it out, SE21212. And you see a bunch of gray filled in. And so it's taking a guess based off of the one example I gave it of what all the other values should be. And up at the top, it's actually saying what we're guessing is that you need to do some sort of formulaic take away everything after the underscore. And so it's just sort of guessing at, this is probably the formula you need. And I could keep adding more examples and it would refine the formula if I was trying to do something different, but it got it right the first time. What I want is just that last part of the equipment ID. So I go hit OK. And now I've got this whole new column here with my data scrubbed for me. It's added a step. And if I want, I don't need this equipment ID anymore. I'm going to go ahead and again, home, remove it. And now this column, this is my real equipment ID. I'm going to quickly, I'll right click and say rename and say equipment ID. This is now my scrub data that is actually useful for me. And I have a whole set of steps here that were applied. If I needed to go back and tweak something, I can step back through my logic. I could add a new step. I could change the existing steps. But the whole idea here is my whole sort of gathering and scrubbing process is now documented and set up for Excel to do for me again in the future. So when I hit close and load, it's now going to do the steps we talked about and process our data and throw it down onto the spreadsheet. And now when I say like this is super easy and super repeatable, I'll show you an example. This data that we have, this is all of my July data. If I wanted to come back and now do this for August, I could actually just take my August data here, this August file, and I'm just going to rename it to export. So it looks exactly like the original file we got our data from. Let me... Oh, it doesn't want me to delete it. Do I have it open? Let's see. Can I delete it? Okay, my file doesn't want to delete it. Okay, well, I'll show you a different way to demonstrate my point. If we went back into that query, so again, we could go to data, and now we have this existing example of our export. I could go back and open up this query and say, oh, my source file isn't actually export.csv, it's export 08 August. I think that was the name of the file I had. Underscore 08 August. And now it knows to look at the August file and do all those steps again. Remove the extra columns again, adjust my equipment ID. So again, I can do this every month, easy, repeat. And even if I didn't have to do that file rename, I could literally just come over here and click refresh. I'm not sure why it won't let me get into the file right now. Yeah, so I'll go back and switch us back to our July data to keep working with. But the whole idea here of get and transform is, again, gather your data, shape it for you, give you all the steps you did to do that shaping and get it ready for analysis, and then make it super easy to repeat that over and over again. And I'm just scratching the surface of what that whole get and transform Power Query function can do. This is a great one to call out. There's tons of training out there. The PowerPoint deck has a bunch of resources for you, including training videos that Microsoft has published on how to get familiar with this tool. Okay, so now we've got our data set, but there's still calculations I need to do on top of it, and then some poking around I need to do to really make sense of the data. This is still pretty raw, and I haven't turned it into anything useful or meaningful for myself. And this is a place where tables can be really helpful. So this is a little bit of a funny term, because I think by default, whenever you see a bunch of numbers in Excel, it's called a table to you. But there is an actual Excel feature called tables, where you specifically call out a section of your spreadsheet and say, this data all belongs together, it works together. And when you do that, it makes it easier to apply formulas to that set of data, makes it easier to do summaries and filtering, and do quick formatting. And I'll show you what you mean. When Power Query dropped this data into my worksheet, you see it's formatted with these clear green lines to help read every other line. It actually dropped it in as a table by default. I'll just really quickly, just as an example, I'm just going to make up some data: date, name, occupation. Okay, today's date, Sue is a doctor. If you had a set of data like this, you could select your data and go to the home ribbon and say format as table. And that would do the exact same thing. It gives you a bunch of formatting options, but at the end of the day, you create a table. I'll undo that and show you another way to do that is to just actually hit Control T, and it'll bring up the same thing. Where's your data? So why create a table? Let me clear this out of our way. The table helps us, again, sort of help Excel associate all of this data as going together, and also that each row is sort of like relevant as its own entry. Just like if you were making your own list, you sort of by eye can tell, oh yeah, this whole entire set of information goes together. The table does that as well. And so it helps you with writing formulas. Let's say, for example, our data export put out duration in hours, but I know from a lot of my reporting, sometimes it's more useful to have it in minutes, because sometimes people are grabbing things for 30 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever it might be. So, excuse me, I'll just add another column here, duration minutes, and you'll see Excel assumes, oh, you're adding more columns to this table, so extended that formatting. And now I'll say that my duration in minutes is just the duration in hours times 60. When I hit enter, it again just sort of filled that down all the way down. So if you ever have the problem where you have a bunch of data and you need to copy a formula all the way down, this sort of helps error-proof yourself. You don't need to double check that you got all the data. The table is going to assume this whole column should look the same. And if you need to make an update to that formula, I'll just do something goofy and say it was 6,000 or something like that. it's always applying it to the whole column. So again, it kind of helps you tighten up control if you ever happen to have a mishap or make a mistake. I'll undo that all the way. Another handy part of this is these formulas. So I'm going all the way down to the table. They'll just keep extending as you keep building out your list. So, if for whatever reason I needed to add another row and say, okay, we had a 5-hour checkout or chunking of something, you can see it added a column, the formatting extended down, it's part of the table, and it just filled in the formula for us because it knows this is always how this formula works. Another really, really handy part of this is when you write formulas to summarize your data. So I'm going to say equals sum. And let's say I want to do this, again, this whole duration minutes column. Oops. Mouse is being funny right now. So I just clicked on it and it grabbed the whole column of data, just like we said. And it wrote it as this funny formula sum duration minutes. So instead of using the normal Excel A1, B3, that sort of thing, it's using this much more readable format of grab the duration minutes column from my table. When I summarize that, it's grabbed the whole column, but again, it's now locked into the table. So if I get rid of a column or get rid of a row, delete, you're going to see the formula automatically updates. It's always just going to keep hanging on to that same set of data. That makes things a lot easier for you. Another handy advantage of having things in a table is you see it sort of defaults to giving you these drop-down filters as well. So if I wanted to look at just a particular piece of equipment, I can go easily click the menu, select the filter, and have a reduced set to look at. Another nice kind of quick, handy piece of working with tables is you can filter through your data and start gleaming some quick insights. Another really, really quick thing I'll show, and this is not special to tables, but a lot of people miss it. When you highlight cells, any cells in Excel, again, doesn't have to be a table, it'll always show you some quick statistics on your table, average, the count, the sum. So if you're ever just needing to do a quick check on some data, like, what is it when I have these three numbers together? Oh, that sum is 275, without having to go write a formula or pull up anything. So another handy thing when you're working with any data, but especially with a table, and you're going to go through and do a bunch of filtering to go check something, I can just quick highlight, see what my total is, or whatever else data might be interesting to you. So that is the fly through on tables. Again, some help articles, some videos on learning more about them. Okay, so I had a table together, but this is just one set of data that I care about. I actually need to combine this with other data to do anything meaningful. As an example, in our data set, our data export had equipment IDs, but I don't sit around with these equipment IDs memorized in my head, right? I have a master list somewhere of our inventory of what these equipment IDs actually are. For simplicity's sake, I put it into this file. Here's our equipment list. It's got the ID, but it's got things that are far more meaningful to me, like what it actually is as an item, or what type of item it is. Is it a 3D printer? Is it a sewing machine, etc.? For me to do analysis on this set of data, the equipment ID itself isn't all that useful for me. I'd like to know, well, what's the total number of checkouts for my sewing machines or something like that? And so I need to combine my two data sets to start doing something useful. This is where there is a very, very handy tool, a handy function called xlookup. And if everyone's been really, really familiar with Excel and has used it in the past, there are formulas also called VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP that a lot of people, if they get familiar with them, love them. XLOOKUP is sort of the next modern iteration. I won't get into the differences between the two. I want to focus on just showing you how to use this. But there's a little bit in the PowerPoint deck if you're curious about it, as far as differences and all that kind of good stuff. But the core point of what XLOOKUP does is help you with one set of data, go look it up in another set of data, and then grab something relevant. I'll show you what I mean with our equipment ID example. So I'm going to say that I actually want the equipment category, right? And that was in our equipment list. It's this category field. To get it over into this data set so I can make it more meaningful, I'm going to use the xlookup formula. I'm going to say equals xlookup. And so the first thing it asks for is a lookup value. So we want to go look up the equipment ID from this table, find it in the equipment list ID column. Oops, I didn't do that correctly. Let me retype that again. I forgot my comma. So I'll say xlookup again equals xlookup. I want to look up my equipment ID, comma. The place we need to go do that, the lookup array, is our equipment list. So I go select the ID. So the first thing it's saying is find the equipment ID in our first table, the one we're working with, go find it in our inventory list. And once you find it, return the category from that same row. And before I hit enter to show you this, xlookup can work with any sort of workbooks and ranges. It doesn't have to be these tables. It just makes it far more readable when you're writing this, writing the formulas to understand when you're using tables. But xlookup will work across an entire spreadsheet. It's not something special to tables. So I'm going to hit enter, and you'll see it just is easily able to go out and grab, okay, SE21212 is actually a sewing and embroidery piece of equipment. And so now when I'm trying to summarize my data, use my table, I could actually say, oh, if I just care about 3D printing right now, here's a smaller list. If I just care about sewing and embroidery, and I could go, do a quick sum on this. If I highlight this data, I see the total checkout time is 2880. Right. So by using this xlookup, it's really easy for me to marry these two data sets, so to speak. I'm going to do that a couple more times just to show you like how this can kind of stack together when you're doing your analysis. So I'm going to grab, we got the equipment category. I'm going to grab the equipment type, which is sort of our next level down of our hierarchy, so to speak. So I'll write the exact same thing, xlookup. I'm going to go look up my equipment ID. I will find it in the equipment list ID column, comma, and I will return item type. And so now I have, again, SE21212 is not just sewing and embroidery, it is specifically a sewing machine. And each item across, we are getting more and more information. I'll write it one more time because you can do this with any set of data. So I've got another funky one here to work with, student IDs. Student IDs alone isn't all that useful for me, but maybe I want to do some analysis based off what college the student is in or what their major is, that sort of thing. Well, if I have a student directory or a listing of my students like I do here, this student list, this is everyone who signed up. Now I can again sort of marry these two data sets together and start doing analysis around what majors are checking out what equipment or something like that. So I'll just grab student college and I'll do that again, that exact same xlookup. Keep doing that, xlookup. This time, instead of grabbing the equipment ID, I'll grab the student ID, comma, go to our student list, look up the student ID, and choose the student college as the thing I want to bring back once we find the ID. And so now I have this data set where I could go out and say like, oh, what about kids from the business school who were grabbing routers? Okay, it happened 4 times, and this is how much or how long it was used for, 420 minutes, also written as 7 hours. So you can see this kind of can help you accelerate doing maybe some more interesting analysis when you have data that's kind of coming from different places. Bring us back into PowerPoint. And so a little bit on xlookup, again, help articles, example videos about using this if you want to dig around and play with it a little bit more. Okay, So I finally got my data assembled. I've got the equipment checkouts. Now I've got what those equipment IDs actually mean. I've got a little bit more information on the people checking it out. This is where I'm actually ready to summarize my data and drill into it and get some meaningful insights from it. I was starting to do that with the table itself, just going and clicking and filtering and finding new information or doing sort of kind of quick analysis. But a really, really helpful tool, once you have like a big data set like this and you're trying to summarize, consolidate down, is to use what are called pivot tables. So again, as I mentioned, they are really, really handy for summarizing data, especially big sets of data. I didn't need, we were looking at a few hundred rows of data just on July, and we can condense that down into really, really quick and simple summaries about equipment types or student IDs or even dates. And I'll show you how to do that. So again, I'm gonna go here under under data and clear my filter just to remind you how big of a list this is. And I say big because this is maybe a couple hundred rows. You could do this with thousands and thousands of rows of data, build a pivot table. And this is definitely a case where you can't process all this information yourself with your own eye. So having a tool to summarize it for you is really, really critical. So if I go under insert, you'll see the first thing that pops up here available is a pivot table. So it's asking me what data am I trying to summarize? And so my source data is actually this whole export table. It's sort of assumed that's what I wanted since that's where we were looking. And it's going to drop this pivot table into a new worksheet. That's usually the simplest way. So again, if you haven't seen this before, it can be a little bit intimidating because I'm on this new page now with this thing on the right that I haven't seen before. But basically what this pivot table is going to be doing, and the reason it's called a pivot table, is it's going to try and summarize your data and allow you to do different pivots, take a look at it with a different lens, maybe a different column of data to slice and dice it with. So I'll start by doing the most straightforward thing. I'm going to take our duration minutes, I'm going to check it here. And so it immediately it could tell that this was a number, so we'll probably want to summarize it. It took a guess at saying it's a sum. And so you see in this section here, sum of duration minutes is what appears. And so this is saying that whole table, the total of the duration is 13,335. But now I can, like we said, take a slice of it. If I want to see this by equipment category, I'll bring this into the rows column. I could also just check the box and I'll see, oh, that 1335 is actually split up among printers, engravers, machining, showing embroidery, just like this. And I could add in that extra drill in layer of the equipment type also. If I drag it in, now I can see, okay, 3D printing was 5,000 some odd minutes. And that was actually, it's a breakdown. We have 3D printers, filament makers, replicators that actually, this is what's contributing to that total usage. We could add in another dimension. Let's go ahead. I'll pull out the equipment type, and this is just as easy to grab and yank out and pull away. And let's add in the student college. And so now I can see that same summary we were doing before. What were the business school students doing with 3D printers? 690 minutes, or College of Arts and Sciences on sewing embroidery, 1,000. So again, it's showing me the total of my data, but giving me these different ways to slice through it. And I call that, it just defaulted to doing the sum. But you can actually click here and say field settings, and you can choose the different calculation type. If we wanted to see count, this would sort of just equate to the total number of checkouts. So it was 9 times a business school student checked out the 3D printer. 1 time someone who is arts and sciences and creative arts checked out something from the machining section. And again, this is just constantly summarizing all of our data, so we could keep pulling in any sort of data we have in our original table, and it'll keep slicing and dicing for us. And so there's options to calculate by sum, by count, average. You can do mins and max, standard deviations, all kinds of things. For my own personal use, it's been sum, count, and average that I most typically use. And I'll just show, and there's another flavor here. There's another section, if we wanted to grab date, you can just filter down to a specific set of dates. If we wanted to see what was happening just on July 2nd, or if we wanted to grab maybe the whole first week of July, we can just select that. And again, keep sort of slicing and dicing the way we want to look at our data to try and grab something meaningful or interesting. Because sometimes it is just sort of a hunt on how to find your data. Another really, really cool and handy feature that we've more recently added to Excel, I'm going to go back to our raw data, right? Say you're at this spot where you just need to hunt and try and figure out some interesting pieces of your data or meaningful insights from your data. One way we try and help you accelerate to getting to that pivot table or whatever might be a really, really good summary for your data is with this under the home ribbon, there's an analyze data button. If I click it, it's actually going to look at the raw data and see if it can find anything interesting for us or recommendations on how to summarize the data. And that's what shows up here on the right column. So you can say one thing that might be interesting is if we want to look at duration by student college, or maybe we want to look at as a chart, duration by equipment type. And it even potentially pulls out something more meaningful and insightful for us. So student college, when it's College of Arts and Sciences, has a notably higher checkout times, duration, than what we see in the other colleges. So that's kind of interesting to me. I want to drill into it more. I can go hit Insert Pivot Chart. And what it's done is it's created the pivot table. Again, it's just the exact same data we had looked at, but it's already done sort of the slicing and dicing that we thought might be interesting, including sorting the information for us from largest to smallest. So I can see College of Arts and Sciences was the biggest checkout here, and this dual major College of Education and College of Arts and Sciences, the smallest one. And it's also created an associated chart with us to kind of help visualize and emphasize one of these meaningful pieces of information. I've got another data set here I'll just share with you where we have door counts from a bunch of events that we did. And so each event, there was maybe a program named to it, and we had different types of attendees, either in person or virtual, and we got a count of whether it was a child, a teen, or an adult attending it. This is another perfect example of I've assembled some data, maybe a pivot table could help me chop it up and grab something interesting from it. Absolutely go build a pivot table off of it. But it's another case where maybe analyze data can help accelerate me. And so it's suggesting, oh, you probably might want to look at a pivot table where everything's broken up by month and by that attendee type. And so go hit Insert Pivot Table, boom, I've already got a suggestion on how to look at my data. Another really handy thing about this Analyze Data feature tool is you can ask questions about your data. Like maybe there's something specific you want to go figure out, and it gives you some examples. Do you care about percentage of door counts? Do you care about what month a particular program happened? Let's just say if I was curious about, I don't know, maybe total child door count. See, it has a suggestion of, oh, you could build a pivot table for door count filtered down by child, and the answer would be 827. And if I went and insert pivot table, I would get that pivot as well. So I don't even have to build a pivot table. If that was the question I was curious about, I've got the answer even without inserting it. And I can go keep running on doing more analysis, coming up with new questions to ask. So just two ways: either you're using the pivot table yourself to kind of scroll through and play around and do different slicing and dicing, or maybe you're using Analyze Data as a way to accelerate you into finding something interesting or helping you answer questions. Again, I'll say feel free to jump in, ask questions as we keep going here. Whoa, I was not expecting that. As I mentioned, they analyze data as another way to accelerate some of those findings. There's help articles available and training videos again. Okay, so now let's say I've got my data, I've done the analysis that I'm really interested in, and now I need to share it in a simple and approachable way. This is where charts, data visualizations really, really help people, but it is a really challenging space to work in. You know, I'm not going to run through these here, but I've put together a quick set of data visualization tips. If you need to present data into charts, these are some things that could be handy. I'm going to flip over to Excel and actually talk through them with real examples to help make them sensible. So let me get over there. And so I've accelerated this a little bit. I've cheated and just sort of gotten the data ready so we could focus on the actual chart itself and what we're doing with it. And we can do some examples of creating them as well. So the first quick tip is that trends over time are best represented by line charts. And so this is the same data we've been working at, this door counts, where we had by month, what are our door counts by attendee type, a child teen. When you have an extended period of time like this, a line chart is going to be the simplest way for people to absorb the movement of any piece of data over time. So we can see this interesting spike that happens with our adult attendance in September. And at the same time, we have a huge dip in teen attendance. That's just something that a table of numbers is really, really hard to grok. And so again, if you just sort of grabbed this data and hit insert under the line charts option, this first one just produced what we were just talking about. Since I ran through that step, I'll actually also point out under insert, there is this recommended charts button. That's the big button that we try and point people to, because the whole idea with that one is we'll try our best. Excel will try its best to give you a suggestion on how to present this data. So if I click it, it actually is going to suggest that same chart, just because, again, it's data over time. Line charts are usually the best way to see those trends. So, and you can see it gives you a few different ways to produce the chart, which each of these has their own merit. And as we keep stepping through some of the other examples, we can talk about where one might be more useful than the other. Zooming in a little bit. When you have parts of a whole, those are best represented by pie and donut charts. And I've got two quick examples on our data set here. Again, it's that same door count information broken out by attendee type. Pie charts and donut charts both show up. If we hit recommended charts, we might show you the pie chart as an example. It's also living up here in the little charting section, pie chart, donut chart. You know, whether to choose one or the other is going to be a matter of preference and your audience, to be quite honest. The key here is if parts of a whole is your main message, this type of grouping makes it really easy for people to grok it visually. I personally tend to be able to read a regular pie chart faster. I think that's just a little bit of how I was schooled growing up in elementary school. From a visual design standpoint, I've heard from many people that donut charts are a little less heavy because the whole thing isn't colored in. You get a little bit more white space, and that can sort of make it less aggressive feeling and a little bit cleaner. Again, it's a little bit knowing your audience as far as what's going to be more useful. The big piece, though, is either one of these going to help you show parts of a whole. And now the next thing is a little caveat to that, which is if you have more than 5 categories here, a pie chart or a donut chart is going to be really difficult to read. So here's an example of that. So we have this now long list of our equipments and how much they were used for. 9 items here. It actually just starts to get a little bit heavy. You have it broken up into so many segments that it becomes hard to read the sort of relative size of each segment. You might be able to easily assemble that the sewing machine was like maybe a little bit more than 25%. Filament maker, vinyl, they look smaller, about the same. But it just, the more and more segments you add to your pie, the less readable becomes, because it's just sort of like, okay, small slice, small slice, small slice, what does it mean? If you need to present data, and there are plenty of good reasons to present a bunch of data, again, with that parts of a whole, one thing to consider is if you should summarize the data. So here, I've taken the data and I've shrunk it down a little bit and said, okay, I'm actually just trying to give a message about these top 4: sewing machine, filament maker, vinyl cutter. Let me just lump everything into an other, because I'm not really trying to tell a story around those. And if I go and create a pie chart around that, this becomes a little bit cleaner for people to read. Going above 5, again, it starts to get difficult to look at all the different slices. And here we can look at them side by side, just as an example. And again, we can do things with coloring to help also emphasize one or the other. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Another great example of how to convey information over time, graduating from that pie chart, if we wanted to talk about parts of a whole over time, then these stacked charts can be really, really helpful. So it's the same message we have of attendee account over time broken out into these categories. But now what I've done by having this stacked column chart is essentially I've gotten these like almost multi-pie charts, if you can think about it this way. Every month I've got a relative idea of the total share of the chart. And where you find those is under insert in this column section. There's the regular column chart where everything's bunched together as separate bars. And then right next to it is that stacked column chart. And again, it comes down to messaging. Like if my main point here is the raw numbers, then having this stacked column chart is helpful because I can clearly read the raw numbers. For example, this June number is slightly under 200. And then the stacked gives me an idea of proportions and relative share. But actually, if I really want to emphasize those proportions, not the raw numbers, there's another chart to use. Besides the stacked column chart, there is the 100% stacked column chart. So now it's like truly pie chart over time because everything is on 100% scale. And this makes it a lot more easier to read something like, oh, in September, we were way skewed higher towards adults and really, really shrunk in our teen attendance. But things started to pick back up. We started to see more teen engagement coming through October and November. So again, it kind of comes down to what the core message is. But either way, those stacked columns can help you with sort of talking about pieces over time. Last one, I think, no, I've got a few more here. When you have lots of values you want to explain together, combo charts can be really helpful. So I want to talk about the individuals, but also share the total number. If I go hit insert, and actually a recommended chart, I think we'll probably give you this as an example. But if we wanted to do it ourselves, under all charts, there is this combo option. And this is where you can set how you want each piece of data to live in the chart. So I want the adults to be a clustered column, child to be a column. I want the teens to be a column as well. And you can see this preview is updating. And I want our total door count to be a line. So I can kind of show both pieces at once. And if I want, I could actually do a second axis on the right side of the chart for that line. So then I kind of get to zoom in on the columns separately and the lines on their own. There's a lot more we could go into combo charts and when and how they're useful, but I think the main thing, a lot of ways this is used is in this example where you sort of have pieces and a total represented, or if you wanted to show raw data and a growth rate on top of it. That's something that's really, really handy to use that second axis that can be on a different scale. So I could have raw numbers, 0 to 1,000 for my bars, and then have a separate scale of 0 to 100% for my line, and really be able to clearly show raw numbers and a growth rate as an example. Get out of the way. Another really handy one is, again, it kind of comes down to the message you want to present. Because if you, sometimes comparing numbers is better represented by plotting their difference rather than the number itself. So in this case, we've got our monthly attendance, and we're kind of trying to compare in-person versus virtual. A lot of times the way you see that presented is what I have on the chart on the right. Raw column, and I can see where one bar is bigger than the other. But the main message here actually comes across as what is the total value, the door count for each of these categories. If I'm trying to emphasize comparing the two, and the raw number is less important relative to the which one's bigger or how much bigger or how much smaller is it relative, then plotting their differences can make a more interesting chart. So what I did over here is I actually created a new table where I just did some math and said, what is it when you do the virtual door count minus the in-person door count? So this is read as, in January, we had 67 more virtual attendees than in-person attendees. When I go and plot this, I'll do insert, just regular bar chart. Now I get a clearer picture of this. Okay, where are we flipping? Where are we more likely to be virtual versus in-person? Again, it comes down to the message I'm trying to present. But if my point was, hey, we just, we explode with virtual attendance at certain points of the year, and you can see that really clearly it's happening in January and May, but February, April, and October are sort of where we lull on virtual attendance. Or if the message was we explode in in-person attendance, I could flip the math and show it the other way, right? But again, it kind of comes down to the message. If that's my message, the chart on the left shows that picture much more clearly than the chart on the right. Okay, we've got a few minutes left, and I wanted to help again with some more data viz tips by showing kind of some, I guess what I call a little bit flashier, if you really want to catch someone's eye, some quick examples of things you could do. So I call this a quick metric graphic. I want to simplify showing parts of a whole. And so I've got some data from February. Here's my in-person attendance. Here's my virtual attendance. And I want to sort of make it really, really clear, hey, it was strong in-person attendance in February. I'm going to select this data. I'm going to go hit a donut chart. And now I'm just going to try and do some quick formatting to make this feel like a more visually compelling chart. So again, my message was in person. So I'm going to click on just the in-person option, and I'm going to try and make it pop with the color like purple. And I want to downplay the virtual attendance, right? So I'm going to actually sort of dull it, and I'm going to say it is gray, right? Now I have this view where in-person is clearly sort of the message of this chart. And I can add to it. I'm going to click on this, right click, and say hit it, add a data label. It got kind of hidden away here. I'm going to select this data label. I double clicked on it, and this table opened, or this pane opened on the right where I can do more formatting options. If I click on the little chart, I get options on what that data label should be. Let's say I want to emphasize percentage. Okay, so now I've got this clear view of the in-person is 68% of this total pie. Just show you again where that was. Label options. I had chosen percentage. Oh, sorry, let me undo that. Okay. I had chosen percentage, and I can unclick this line to get rid of that leader line there. And then I can just do, again, sort of more formatting. Let me give that purple text. Let me make it bold. Let me make it big. And now I have this, again, not something super complex, but a quick way to make it really easy to absorb this information, this message I'm trying to share. Another sort of quick graphic. Let's say I wanted to represent my data on our attendance as a bar chart, but this kind of feels a little bit, I don't know, ho-hum. I want to kind of make it a little bit more engaging to people. one thing you can do is you can actually change your bars or any type of chart. You can change it to, rather than being a color, to be filled with a picture. Excuse me. So just to make it really clear how I'm doing this, if I had double clicked on this, or I could right click and hit the format option. Again, this pane opens up. I can go under the fill paint bucket here, and this is where I can go choose a color for it. I can actually choose a picture, right? And I can choose what kind of picture. Let's say I'm talking about attendance. You know, it'd be kind of nice is if I just had sort of like a little person filling my bar rather than just the raw color. And so here are a bunch of icons that are in Office. I'll just go for this sort of generic person look. And now I've got little person bars filling up my chart, and I can, rather than having it be a stretched out image, I can stack it. And so now, you know, just a little bit more of a playful view of the exact same set of data. But now maybe this is something that's a little bit more intriguing for someone to look at. Excuse me. Sorry. So we didn't leave as much time for questions that I hoped for, but I do want to at least hang out, hold the 2 minutes. If there's anything people want to drill into, I can try my best to field a quick question.
Johnny, can we, would you be willing to share your slides with us? What we could do is we could put it on the library's working group page on the Nation of Makers website.
Yes, so I will share the slides, and I will share this file as well. I'll share 2 versions of the file, the one where I've done the work and the one before I started the work. And so
awesome.
If you wanted, you could kind of run through this video at your own pace and repeat the steps with me.
Great. Well, my mind is blown. This was like so helpful. I'm excited to take some actual data and start doing this kind of all of this amazing stuff.
Cool. Yeah, I hope this was helpful for folks. Like I said, really just scratching the surface. As I'm sure you're aware, when you work with Excel, there's a lot to do, and there's only so much time in the day to go learn it. So I hope there was something you could maybe take away and go fiddle around with later. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to hear from people about the work they're doing, or, you know, shoot questions. That works too.
Good to know. Great. All right. Well, it looks like we don't have any questions, but thanks everybody for coming. And Johnny, thank you so much. This was just amazing, so helpful. Yeah, I hope everyone has a great evening.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, everyone. Have a great one.